Well, we begin this morning with that battle over former President Trump's tax returns.
Yeah, the House Ways and Means Committee voted yesterday to make 6 years of Trump's tax returns public. This follows numerous attempts by Trump himself to keep his returns out of the hands of Congress. We've got a preview of those returns in a report released last night by the Joint Committee on Taxation. And it comes as the January 6th committee is also set to release its final report on the insurrection today. Now, here's what House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Richard Neal said after that Trump taxes vote.
I want to say this, after a long process, that this was not about being punitive, it was not about being malicious, and there were no leaks from the committee. We adhered carefully to the law.
Joining us now to break all of this down is NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Allie Raffa and NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos. Allie, let's start with you. As we said, the staff of the Joint Committee on Taxation released that report last night on former President Trump's taxes. The House Ways and Means Committee also released its own separate report. So what are the big takeaways from both?
Yeah, Joe, good morning. Well, the Ways and Means Committee's 29-page report that they filed yesterday really looks into why the IRS failed to conduct this audit of former President Trump's tax returns until they were asked to do so by the House of Representatives. We know this is a process from history that all presidents and vice presidents are required to do. So that's really the crux of why this committee fought so hard for these returns, to be able to codify this process into law to ensure that it's done every single time after former President Trump promised so many times to disclose these returns and never did. The memo criticizes the IRS for dropping the ball. It says, quote, during the prior administration, it was clear that the mandatory audit program was not a priority and was not provided with the resources needed to ensure compliance by the former president. The memo even includes a memo from the IRS admitting to this lack of resources. On the other hand, you have the Joint Committee on Taxation's report that includes a summary of these returns, but not the actual returns themselves. It also criticizes the IRS, saying that they really trusted these outside accountants, this outside firm that former President Trump used for these returns, but they didn't necessarily verify the authenticity or the truthfulness of what's included in the returns. There are several things that lawmakers are undoubtedly going to be looking into when they more closely examine the details of these reports.
And Danny, let's bring you in here. So usually there's a exemption. You don't have to give your tax returns out. They're confidential for an individual under federal law. So what's the exception here? Is it because he's a former president?
Let's take a step back. This report found that Donald Trump, who told us many times, I can't release my returns because they're under audit. It may be the case that they were never under audit, despite the fact that an Internal Revenue Service manual requires them to be under audit for a president. So in other words, the entire reason he didn't release them was a reason that didn't exist, which is just breathtaking. Now, you ask about access. The committee was always going to get access to these returns because there is a law about 100 years old that requires production of the returns to the committee. The Ways and Means Committee and the Finance Committee can review these in order to discuss legislation, to possibly come up with new legislation. So access is a different issue than releasing them. So even though it should have taken 3 days, it ended up taking 3 years of court battles to release these returns. And I say release, I should say provide these returns to the committee. Now they have elected to release them, which is, given the executive summary and the report I read, very understandable, because there seems to be a lot that went wrong here.
And that brings us into, I think, the number one question, Allie, people probably have this morning, which is when could we expect to see Trump's full returns? And then from there, what kind of information do lawmakers hope to find?
Yeah, the Ways and Means Committee says they can be released in a few days because of the amount of sensitive and personal information that has to be redacted from them before they're made public. And some of the things that lawmakers and others are going to be looking for in them are obviously Trump's yearly income, the sources of that income, the tax he paid on it, the state of his finances while he was president, those net losses he reported while he was in office, any conflicts of interest that he had during his presidency, see any association or links to foreign bank accounts, what was donated to charity, any real estate depreciations, as well as any more insight into that IRS audit, as Danny mentioned, that former President Trump was saying was still ongoing. So there's a lot to glean from these documents that lawmakers are going to be looking over in the next few days before these are released, as well as after.
And Danny, that is a long list of stuff we couldn't find out from these releases. What exactly will happen? What ramifications could we see if there's evidence of wrongdoing in these returns?
Yeah, Trump won't face any ramifications for fighting the release of his returns, even though it took several years. But as many have pointed out, the release of these returns I think of as a kind of flagpole planted in the ground. In other words, this is Trump committing to a particular thing so that when he's being investigated in other venues, for example, for inflating his value to get favorable loans or deflating his value when the tax man cometh, those are the kinds of things that put a pin in what Trump at least said to the IRS about what he owes, what he's owned, what he's given as gifts. It gives anyone investigating him plenty of evidence, but in the case of the DOJ, it may be evidence that in other ways they've long already had.
There's something else we've been talking about all week, Allie, and that is the January 6th committee's full report, which is finally set to be released today. What can we expect? Are there any surprises left to come?
It's unlikely that this final report is going to have any surprises because committee members gave us sort of a preview of what to expect in it during that last meeting that they had on Monday. They alluded to more information on the cases that they built during these 11 hearings and this last meeting that's going to be revealed in this report. More information about the cases that they built for why they referred these criminal charges to the Justice Department for former President Trump. These cases to the House Ethics Committee for their GOP colleagues in Congress, colleagues who ignored subpoenas by the January 6th committee. There's going to be more information about the interviews of those more than 1,000 witnesses that the committee interviewed, the thousands of pieces of evidence from communication between Secret Service agents and White House officials on, before, and around January 6th, as far as some of the communication from even members of Congress to the White House trying to get former President Trump to condemn the violence going on at the Capitol. So there's so much more to be learned from these this final report that we now know committee members are sharing this information with the Justice Department. But committee members did allude and give us sort of a hint of what to expect in this lengthy report.
So much to cover this morning, Allie and Danny. Thank you for walking us through it all. We appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.